My name is Emma Hansen. I am 20 years old. I grew up in an ordinary American family in Brooklyn. My father, James Hansen, was a successful businessman, and my mother, Laura, was a housewife who dedicated herself to taking care of our family. On the surface, we looked like the perfect family, but beneath the surface, tensions were hiding that I didn't know about until a certain moment. This summer, unexpected changes occurred in our lives. It was a hot July morning. The sun was mercilessly scorching, and the air in our house seemed stagnant. I spent the morning in my room, as usual, drawing. Drawing was my refuge, a way to express what I couldn't say out loud. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard my mom calling me downstairs. "Emma, come down, please help me with lunch. Your father brought a friend." Her voice was slightly tense, and I immediately understood that she was unhappy about this visit. I put down my pencils and looked at myself in the mirror. My long black hair was tied in a messy ponytail. I was wearing an old t-shirt and shorts. I was hardly ready to receive guests, but I didn't care. I wasn't expecting anything interesting from these visits. Descending the stairs, I heard laughter and male voices from the living room. Entering the kitchen, I noticed my mum stirring the soup vigorously, her face tense. "Mum, are you okay?" I asked, approaching her. "Yes, sweetie, just a bit tired," she replied, trying to smile. "Help me set the table. Your father wants to impress his new friend." I started setting out plates and cutlery. Meanwhile, I heard snippets of conversation from the living room. My father's voice was full of enthusiasm, and I understood that he was boasting about his successes again. "Tom, you need to learn these tricks if you want to succeed in business," he said. The response was deep, velvety, with a slight accent that I couldn't place. "Thanks for the advice, James. With your help, I'm sure I'll be closing deals as successfully as you soon." I was intrigued by this new voice. I peeked into the living room and saw him. Tom was sitting opposite my father. He was the most attractive man I had ever seen. Tall, athletic build, with black hair and a 3-day stubble, giving him a casual look. But what struck me most were his eyes, intensely green, almost glowing. Our gazes met, and I felt an electric wave run through my body. He smiled at me with a crooked smile that made my heart stop. Embarrassed for staring at him, I quickly returned to the kitchen. "Did you finish setting the table?" my mom asked, snapping me out of my daze. "Almost," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. "Mom, who is that man with Dad?" Mom frowned. "His name is Tom. He's a new employee at your father's company. He's from Chicago, and your father has taken him under his wing." "Okay," was all I could say, unable to stop thinking about his green eyes. Dinner proceeded in a tense atmosphere. My father and Tom dominated the conversation, discussing business and sharing office anecdotes. My mother barely intervened, just serving food and smiling forcibly. I couldn't stop glancing at Tom. Every time our eyes met, I felt a flutter in my stomach. There was something in the way he looked at me that made me feel vulnerable and excited at the same time. After dinner, while clearing the table, I heard my father invite Tom to stay for a drink. My heart leapt at the prospect of having him in the house longer. "Emma," my father called, "why don't you show Tom your drawings? I'm sure he'll be interested." I felt myself blushing. My drawings were very personal. I had never shown them to anyone outside the family, but the idea of being alone with Tom was too tempting to refuse. "Sure, Dad," I replied, trying to sound casual. Tom followed me to my room. Entering, I suddenly became aware of the mess. Pencils and papers were scattered everywhere, clothes thrown on the bed. I felt embarrassed, but Tom didn't seem to notice. His eyes scanned the walls, covered with my drawings. "Wow, Emma," he said admiringly. "You have an impressive talent." His voice, so close, gave me chills. "Thank you," I murmured, not daring to look at him directly. He approached one of the drawings, a charcoal portrait of a young woman with a melancholic expression. "This one is particularly beautiful," he commented. "Is it a self-portrait?" I shook my head. "No, it's just a woman I imagined." Tom turned to me, his green eyes fixed on mine. "She looks a lot like you. She has the same intensity in her gaze." I didn't know what to say. The air between us seemed charged with electricity. He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away until my back touched the wall. Tom placed a hand next to my head, cornering me without actually touching me. "You're a very special girl, Emma," he whispered. His breath smelled of mint and the wine he had drunk during dinner. "I wonder if you know how beautiful you are." My heart was beating so hard, I feared he could hear it. I wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in my throat. Tom brought his face close to mine, so close that I could count his eyelashes. At that moment, my mother's voice resonated from the hallway. "Emma, where are the dessert plates?" Tom quickly stepped away, as if nothing had happened. He gave me one last intense look before leaving the room. "Thank you for showing me your drawings, Emma. They're really impressive." I stood there trembling, trying to process what had just happened. Had it been real or just a product of my imagination? The only thing I knew for certain was that Tom had awakened sensations in me that I had never experienced before. A few days had passed since Tom first visited our home, but I couldn't get him out of my head. His green eyes and deep voice kept resurfacing in my thoughts. I tried to focus on my studies and daily tasks, but my imagination always drifted back to him. Every time I sat down at my drawing table, my hands instinctively began to recreate his features. I drew his face, his smile, his eyes that seemed to peer into the soul. The drawings became increasingly detailed and lifelike, as if I were trying to capture his very essence on paper. An inner conflict tore me apart. On one hand, I knew my feelings for Tom were inappropriate. On the other, I couldn't resist the attraction. One night, as I finished another drawing, I heard my father tell my mother that Tom would visit us again. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of excitement and fear. I didn't know how I would behave when I saw him again. That evening, when Tom arrived at our doorstep once more, the atmosphere in the house became even tenser. My father was delighted to see his friend and eagerly shared stories about his work. My mother, as usual, silently prepared dinner, trying not to show her displeasure. And I tried to avoid looking at Tom, fearing my feelings would be too obvious. But it was impossible to avoid his presence. We exchanged smiles and brief glances, and each time, my heart began to beat faster. His presence was palpable, even when he wasn't speaking. After dinner, when my father and Tom were discussing their business, I retreated to my room to calm down. But thoughts of Tom wouldn't leave me alone. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. "Come in," I said, expecting to see my mother or father. Tom entered the room, his gaze serious and thoughtful. "Hi, Emma. I wanted to talk to you," he said, closing the door behind him. "About what?" I asked, feeling a wave of excitement rise inside me. About your drawings, he replied, stepping closer to my desk and examining the latest sketches. You really are talented. Thank you, I whispered, trying to hide my nervousness. We spent a few minutes in silence as Tom studied my work. Then he sat on the chair next to me, and I felt the air between us become charged with electricity again. Do you really think I'm talented? I asked, hoping to continue the conversation and distract myself from my thoughts. Absolutely, he replied, looking me in the eyes. You're very special, Emma. I felt my cheeks begin to burn. His words evoked mixed feelings in me, joy and fear intertwined in a single moment. In the following weeks, my connection with Tom grew even stronger. We exchanged many messages, sharing thoughts and experiences. Each of his messages made my heart beat faster. There was nothing explicit in our conversations, but I felt that something special was developing between us. Every visit of his was accompanied by sweet conversations and smiles. We discussed everything, from everyday matters to our deepest desires and aspirations. Tom talked about his life in Chicago, his dream of starting his own business, and the challenges he had faced. I, in turn, shared my thoughts about the future, my passion for art, and my dream of becoming a famous artist. One day, when Tom visited again, I decided to show him my new drawing. We were sitting in my room, discussing my latest works. I picked up one of the drawings and, without thinking, sat on his lap to better show the details. Tom was clearly embarrassed, but did not push me away. Look, I finished this drawing yesterday, I said, pointing out the details. What do you think? Tom looked at the drawing and then at me. His gaze was serious, but at the same time gentle. It's just amazing, Emma. You are truly talented, he said, trying to remain calm. I felt his hands slightly tense under me. I hugged him around the neck and decided to tease him, breathing heavily into his ear. Thank you, Tom, I whispered. You know, your support means a lot to me. His breathing became more rapid, and I could feel him struggling to maintain his composure. At that moment, something more than just friendship emerged between us. It was the moment when forbidden feelings came to the surface. We sat like that for a few more minutes, enjoying the closeness and silence. I knew it was wrong, that such a relationship could lead to trouble, but the desire to be close to Tom was too strong to resist. Suddenly, Tom stood up, gently lifting me off his lap. Emma, this would be wrong, he said, trying not to meet my gaze. You know I can't allow myself to go any further. I knew he was right. We both knew we shouldn't continue, but the feelings we had were too strong to simply forget. A few days had passed since I last saw Tom. We continued to exchange messages, but our conversations became more reserved. I tried to focus on my drawings and studies, but thoughts of Tom wouldn't leave me alone. On the same day when I was lost in thought about him, something unexpected happened. I was helping my mum tidy up the old attic. We were sorting through boxes of things that hadn't been used for years. Among the old books, clothes, and toys, I stumbled upon an old box of photographs. I opened it and began to browse through the pictures. Suddenly, one of the photos caught my attention. It showed a young woman, very similar to my mum, embracing a man I had never seen before. Mom, I called, holding the photograph in my hands. Who is this man? Mum turned to me, and when she saw the photo, she turned pale. She took the picture from my hands and looked at it with an expression I had never seen before. Her eyes filled with tears, and she sighed heavily. Emma, we need to talk, she said. sitting down on an old sofa in the corner of the attic. I sat next to her, not knowing what to expect. "This man is Ryan," she began. "He was my first love. I met him long before I met your father." I listened to her story stunned. Mom continued, "We loved each other, but our relationship was complicated. Ryan was a musician, and he had his own demons. He struggled with addiction, and despite all his promises, he couldn't change his life. My parents were adamantly against our relationship, and in the end, I had to make a decision." Mom told me how she met my father shortly after breaking up with Ryan. He offered her stability and security, and she, being pregnant, agreed to marry him. "Your father knows I had someone before him, but he doesn't know the whole truth," Mom confessed. "I never told him about Ryan and how much he affected my life." I sat, stunned by her story, realizing that my family was not as simple as it seemed. My mum, always so proper and devoted, turned out to be a woman with a past full of difficult decisions and painful memories. "Mum, why did you never tell me about this?" I asked, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "I wanted to protect you, Emma," she replied. "But now I understand that it was a mistake. You have the right to know the truth." We sat in the attic for a long time, discussing her past and the secrets she had kept for so many years. I realized that behind the facade of our perfect family lay deeply personal and painful stories. This changed my perception of my parents and made me rethink my attitude towards them. That evening, lying in my bed, I thought about how many more secrets our family might be hiding. I now understood that perfect families don't exist, and every family has its own secrets and problems. But most importantly, I realized that despite all the difficulties, our family remained strong and united. Several weeks had passed since I learned about my mother's family secrets. From time to time, my mother and I would revisit these conversations, and I felt our bond grow stronger. Meanwhile, my relationship with Tom had become more complicated. We continued to exchange messages, and each meeting became more significant for me. One evening, when my father once again invited Tom for dinner, I felt that this evening would be special. We sat at the table discussing various topics, but the tension between Tom and me was palpable. When dinner was over, my father suggested that Tom stay the night. "Why don't you stay the night?" he asked. "We could continue our conversation in the morning." Tom agreed, and my heart started to beat faster. The prospect of him staying overnight in our house filled me with mixed feelings, excitement and fear. Late at night, when everyone had gone to bed, I lay in my room, unable to sleep. Thoughts of Tom would not leave me alone. Suddenly, I heard quiet footsteps behind the door. I lay with my back to the door and didn't see who entered, but I felt someone gently remove the blanket from my bed and lie down behind me, pressing close. My heart froze with surprise. The hands wandering over my hips, ribs, and neck were gentle but determined. I felt someone removing my shorts and realized it was Tom by his heavy breathing. Everything inside me turned upside down. Tom embraced me, and I felt our bodies synchronize. We remained in silence, enjoying the moment. Suddenly, I felt something wet between my legs. Desire overwhelmed me, and I gave in to the temptation. Taking what Tom placed between my legs, I helped guide him inside. We remained silent, feeling each other. And it was an expression of our feelings and desires that we had been hiding for so long. After a few hours filled with passion and silence, Tom quietly got up from the bed. He dressed carefully and looked at me. "I need to go back to the guest room so as not to arouse suspicion," he whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and understanding. Tom quietly left my room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I lay in the dark, feeling my heart still beating faster from what had happened. The next morning, waking up alone, I realized that this night had changed a lot. Our relationship had become deeper, and although I knew this could lead to problems, I couldn't deny what I felt. Several weeks had passed since I learned about my mother's family secrets. From time to time, my mother and I would revisit these conversations, and I felt our bond grow stronger. Meanwhile, my relationship with Tom had become more complicated. We continued to exchange messages, and each meeting became more significant for me. One evening, when my father once again invited Tom for dinner, I felt that this evening would be special. We sat at the table discussing various topics, but the tension between Tom and me was palpable. When dinner was over, my father suggested that Tom stay the night. "Why don't you stay the night?" he asked. "We could continue our conversation in the morning." Tom agreed, and my heart started to beat faster. The prospect of him staying overnight in our house filled me with mixed feelings, excitement and fear. Late at night, when everyone had gone to bed, I lay in my room, unable to sleep. Thoughts of Tom would not leave me alone. Suddenly, I heard quiet footsteps behind the door. I lay with my back to the door and didn't see who entered, but I felt someone gently remove the blanket from my bed and lie down behind me, pressing close. My heart froze with surprise. The hands wandering over my hips, ribs, and neck were gentle but determined. I felt someone removing my shorts and realized it was Tom by his heavy breathing. Everything inside me turned upside down. Tom embraced me, and I felt our bodies synchronize. We remained in silence, enjoying the moment. Suddenly, I felt something wet between my legs. Desire overwhelmed me, and I gave in to the temptation. Taking what Tom placed between my legs, I helped guide him inside. We remained silent, feeling each other, and it was an expression of our feelings and desires that we had been hiding for so long. After a few hours filled with passion and silence, Tom quietly got up from the bed. He dressed carefully and looked at me. "I need to go back to the guest room so as not to arouse suspicion," he whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and understanding. Tom quietly left my room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I lay in the dark, feeling my heart still beating faster from what had happened. The next morning, waking up alone, I realized that this night had changed a lot. Our relationship had become deeper, and although I knew this could lead to problems, I couldn't deny what I felt. I also realized that this was our first and last night together, as in a few days I was leaving to study at a university in another city. This thought filled me with sadness, but I understood that I needed to move forward and build my own life. Saying goodbye to my home and parents was difficult, but I knew a new life awaited me at the university. My dream of becoming an artist was slowly coming true. I had enrolled in a prestigious university known for its strong art program. My heart was filled with excitement and fear of the unknown. The first few weeks at the university passed in a blur. Classes, new acquaintances, lectures, and practical assignments took up all my time. I felt my world expanding, and each day brought new discoveries. One of the most interesting subjects for me was art history. I eagerly awaited the classes to delve into the past. and learn more about the great artists and their works. During the first art history exam, I met Professor Michael Johnson. He was a young and energetic teacher who immediately caught my attention with his deep knowledge of the subject and passion for art. The exam was challenging, but I felt confident knowing I had prepared well. After the exam, I stayed behind in the classroom to ask Professor Johnson a few questions. When the other students had left, I approached his desk. "Professor Johnson, may I ask you a couple of questions about today's material?" I asked, feeling a slight nervousness. "Of course, Emma," he replied, smiling. "What do you want to know?" We began discussing the topics covered in the exam, and I noticed how his eyes lit up when he talked about art. His passion for the subject was infectious, and I felt the connection forming between us. In the following weeks, our conversations continued. I often stayed after class to discuss topics of interest with Professor Johnson. We talked not only about art, but also about life, dreams, and aspirations. These conversations became a source of inspiration and support for me. Gradually, our relationship extended beyond academic discussions. We began spending more time together, and I learned that Michael was not only a talented teacher, but also a kind and honest person with whom I could talk about anything. His honesty and openness attracted me, and I felt I could trust him with my most intimate thoughts and feelings. Michael became not only a mentor but also a friend. His support helped me cope with difficulties, and I felt that with him by my side, I could achieve my goals. Our relationship developed slowly but surely, and with each passing day, I became more convinced that I had met someone with whom I could be completely honest and open. Several months had passed since Michael and I took our relationship to the next level. We realized that what we had was not just affection, but true love. This realization came to us simultaneously, and we didn't hesitate in making a decision. Michael proposed to me, and I joyfully accepted. Our parents and friends were thrilled for us. The wedding was small, but beautiful and touching. We decided to hold the ceremony in the garden of my parents' house, surrounded by our closest people. My mother helped me choose the dress, and my father, nervously hiding his tears, walked me down the aisle. Michael waited for me under an arch of flowers, his eyes shining with happiness. When we exchanged rings and vows, I felt that this moment was the beginning of a new, wonderful chapter in our lives. After the ceremony, there was a cozy reception with homemade treats and dancing under the stars. Everything felt like a fairy tale. Married life with Michael turned out to be even better than I had imagined. We supported each other in everything, sharing joys and sorrows, and each day brought new discoveries. We had common interests, but also our own hobbies, which made our life rich and varied. Michael continued teaching at the university, and his students adored him. I fully dedicated myself to art. My works began attracting the attention of galleries, and soon I received an invitation for my first solo exhibition. It was an incredible feeling to see people admire my paintings, finding something personal in them that touched their souls. Michael and I often discussed my new projects, and his support was invaluable to me. He helped me believe in myself, inspired me to create new works, and always found the words to lift my spirits when something didn't work out. Thanks to his love and support, I achieved much in my career. Over time, my work started selling for good money, and I felt I could call myself a successful artist. We bought a cozy house with a large, bright studio where I could create. Our home was filled with laughter, love, and happiness. We often hosted dinners for friends and family, and each time I felt our bond with loved ones grow stronger. Our happiness wasn't without clouds. We had our difficulties and problems like any other family. But we always found the strength to overcome them together, supporting each other. Every obstacle we overcame only made us stronger. Time passed, and I continued to grow as an artist. My works began to be exhibited not only in our country, but also abroad. I traveled to different cities and countries, met new people, and was inspired by new experiences. But no matter where I went, I always knew that Michael was waiting for me at home, my rock and the love of my life.